Since 1999, LEGO has released over 1,500 Star Wars minifigures, with some of them being very iconic and some of the best LEGO minifigures ever made, while other ones are not so iconic, or iconic for the wrong reasons, because they're either controversial or just flat out bad. So in this video, I want to go over what I think is the worst LEGO Star Wars minifigure every year from 1999 all the way up to current day 2026. Now before I get into it, I do have to say that there are a handful of years where there simply just was not a bad figure. Like for example, the year 2003, LEGO only released 18 new Star Wars minifigures that year, which isn't that many, and for the time period, they're all really good. But for the sake of this video, I still gotta challenge myself to pick one that I think is the worst. So as you watch this video, please keep in mind that if a figure makes the list, it doesn't always mean it's necessarily bad. It just means that for the sake of this video, I had to pick one that I think is the worst or weakest out of all the ones that were released in that respective year. But now that I got that out of the way, I have a total of 28 years to go through, and starting off with 1999, LEGO released a total of 27 figures this year for the opening year of the theme, and in my opinion, the worst or the weakest ones are the young Anakin Skywalkers. He came in 3 sets, that being the Mos Espa Pod Race, the original Naboo Starfighter, and the original Anakin's Pod Racer. And there are technically 2 variants of him, except the only difference is literally the color of his hat piece, so because of that, I'm just considering them both to be the same figure. But yeah, the reason I chose him is just because he looks kind of weird without short legs. I know obviously back in 1999, LEGO didn't have the short legs yet, so they really had no other choice besides to give him the long legs, but still it just looks kind of off, especially when you compare it to all the other 1999 figures. For the most part, they're pretty innovative, because obviously it was the first year of Star Wars, but you got figures like the Scout Trooper, Darth Vader, Darth Maul, that all have unique helmet molds and unique printing, and then of course you got the Battle Droids, which literally got perfected when they came out. They haven't been changed since, along with multiple other innovative figures for 1999. I mean, LEGO just did a really good job this year. But then you have the young Anakins, and in my opinion, they just look kind of off compared to all the other ones. Moving on to the second year of LEGO Star Wars, that being the year 2000, LEGO released 17 new figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst one is kind of a no-brainer. It's gotta be Alder Beedo. This is one of the most cursed Star Wars figures ever made. I mean, just look at the thing. It appeared in 7159 Star Wars Pod Racing Bucket, which that set itself is honestly a whole other jar of worms because it's also pretty weird. But still, this specific Alder Beedo is one of the strangest figures ever made. It literally looks like something you'd see under Sid's bed in Toy Story. And one thing I don't really understand is why LEGO wanted to make this character so bad back in the early 2000s, because if you look at the actual character, it's a pretty complex looking alien. And I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I have to applaud LEGO for trying to shoot for the stars and make this character back in the early 2000s, but I just think they were simply biting off more than they could chew, because the figure looks nothing like the alien in Star Wars. And what's even more interesting is that they actually tried to make this figure again the very next year in 2001, except that time they went a completely different route and tried to make it a mold instead of brick built. And I have to say, they definitely did do a better job the second time. However, I still think it was just biting off more than they could chew, because after all, the mold looks pretty bland. It doesn't even have any printing. And these 2 figures right here are the only times LEGO has ever tried to make this character before, and it was in back-to-back years, and they're completely different. Again, it's just really strange how LEGO seemed to be kind of obsessed with this character back in the early 2000s. They just really wanted to make it a figure for some reason. And what came from that was 2 of the strangest figures ever made, with the earlier one from 2000 obviously being the worst of the 2, and for the sake of this video, what I think is the worst minifigure from the year 2000. Although I do have to say, the face print is pretty cool. That could definitely be used with making some other custom figures or something like that. Anyways though, moving on to the year 2001, LEGO only introduced 7 new Star Wars figures this year, which is the least out of any year of Star Wars. And most of you guys probably thought I would just pick the second Alder Beedo, the one that I just talked about, the molded one. However, I'm not doing that because again, as much as I think LEGO was trying to bite off more than they could chew, I do have to applaud them for trying to make this complex looking character back in the early 2000s. And unlike the brick built one that I just talked about, this molded one definitely does resemble the character a lot better. So because of that, out of these 7 figures, I gotta go with the Imperial Shuttle pilot. He appeared in 7166 Imperial Shuttle, the first Imperial Shuttle LEGO ever made, and he is not a bad figure at all. He gets the job done and looks like an Imperial Shuttle pilot, but compared to the 6 other figures from 2001, he is pretty boring. I'd say this was a pretty innovative year because they introduced some iconic Imperial figures, that being the first TIE Fighter, the first Stormtrooper, and the first Imperial Royal Guard, along with the first molded Watto and the first Battle Droid Security, and then of course the molded Alder Beedo. So again, out of the 7 figures that released this year, the Imperial Shuttle pilot is just kind of boring and not as innovative, so I had to pick it. He also reminds me of one of the first police officer minifigures from like the 70s or whenever LEGO first introduced them, so that doesn't really help its case much either, because at that point, it doesn't even feel like Star Wars anymore. Moving on to 2002, 2002, this was a very iconic year for LEGO Star Wars because it was when we got the first wave of Episode 2 sets. LEGO introduced 21 new figures this year, with all of them being really good for the most part, but in my opinion, the weakest one is the Anakin Skywalker from Bounty Hunter Pursuit. And the reason is just because this is simply the less cool version of him because he doesn't have his cape like the one that came in Tusken Raider Encounter. Again, it's not a bad figure. This is one of those years I mentioned where every figure is good and I still gotta pick one that I think is the worst. But I mean, there's simply just a cooler version of this figure that exists where he has his cape versus this one where he doesn't have his cape. So that's why I picked it. Up next, we have 2003, another pretty iconic year for LEGO Star Wars because of one specific extremely overrated set. LEGO made 18 new Star Wars figures this year, and in my opinion, the weakest one is the Luke Skywalker from the Jabba's Palace. And the reason I chose this one is because it's simply just a version of Luke Skywalker that at this point we had already seen before in years prior, and compared to the other figures from this year, it's just not that exciting because in 2003 you obviously had the Cloud City figures, you had the first AT-AT driver and Snowtrooper, along with the first Geonosians, the first Geonosis Battle Droid, the first Gamorrean Guard, Bib Fortuna, and Jabba the Hutt. There were just a lot of new, innovative, and exciting figures that released this year, and then you have Luke Skywalker, which wasn't that exciting. Moving on to 2004, this definitely wasn't a very exciting year for Star Wars compared to 2002 and 2003. We got 16 new Star Wars figures this year, well, technically 15, I don't know why that droid brain is counted as a figure. Regardless though, I'm going with Dak Ralter from the 2004 Snowspeeder. Compared to the other figures this year, he's just uninteresting, and especially compared to the other Rebel figures. Luke Skywalker, the Hoth Rebel Trooper, and Dutch all have unique face prints that kind of represent their character and just give them more uniqueness, but then Dak Ralter simply just has the smiley face print, which is definitely fun and iconic for LEGO, but compared to the other figures this year, I think they could have done a little more. I definitely think he could have had the headset print like Vander does. Moving on to 2005, obviously another very iconic year for LEGO Star Wars because of Revenge of the Sith. LEGO released a total of 33 new Star Wars figures this year, a lot of them being very iconic to this day, but there is one that I do think is actually pretty rough, and that is R5-D4 from the Sandcrawler. And the reason I think this figure is rough is probably pretty obvious. It doesn't have a printed head. He's got the body print, but the head print is not there. It's like someone just rubbed it off with some rubbing alcohol or something. And to this day, I don't really understand why LEGO did this, because they made this exact droid in 1999 and they gave him the printed head, but then 6 years later in 2005, they didn't do that. My only theory as to why they did this is because he's technically not supposed to have a dome headpiece. He's supposed to have one of these straight edge headpieces that you're seeing on screen right now, but I'm pretty sure LEGO didn't start using these for astromechs until the early 2010s or the late 2000s. So in 2005, to make up for this, I guess they tried to do what you see here, just a blank dome headpiece with a little circular plate underneath it, instead of just printing it on a dome piece like they did in 1999. Although again, that's just my theory, I don't know if that's true or not, but at the end of the day, the figure just doesn't look good. It obviously needs printing on the head. Anyways though, up next we have 2006. LEGO released 24 new figures this year, and all of these figures are good for the most part. This was a surprisingly consistent year, but still, I gotta pick one that I think is the weakest, so I'm going with Wedge Antilles from the 2006 X-Wing. I hate to pick another Rebel pilot, but again, it's just because of the default smiley face. There were a number of other figures from 2006 that had this exact same face print, but they weren't named characters like Wedge, so I think he could have had something unique, even something just as simple as a headset print like the Dutch Vander that I mentioned from 2004. Up next we have 2007. LEGO released 34 new Star Wars figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst one was kind of a no-brainer for me at least. I had to go with the Droideka from the 2007 MTT. Everyone always loves to glaze the 2007 MTT and talk about how it's the best Separatist set ever made, but nobody ever mentions the Droideka. This is arguably, in my opinion, the worst Droideka LEGO has ever made before. It is obnoxiously oversized. The shaping and building techniques also just don't make any sense to me at least. I don't understand why the torso area that the legs connect to is so tall. I don't understand the part of the head that hangs down in the front. It just looks so goofy. Again, it's obnoxiously oversized. And I mean, most LEGO Droidekas are oversized, but they at least resemble a Droideka. I mean, they get the proportions right, especially the original ones from 2002, but this one just completely throws all of that out the window, and nobody ever talks about it because it just happens to be in one of the best sets ever made. Moving on to 2008, another very notable year for Star Wars because we got the first Clone Wars sets. There were a total of 39 new figures introduced this year, and some of you guys might not like my pick, but I'm going with the White Assassin droid from the Death Star. Out of all the classic LEGO Assassin droids, I simply think this one is just the least interesting. 2 years prior in 2006, we got the first IG-88 in silver, and he looks pretty cool, and then the next year we got more silver droids along with an all-black version. And then in 2008, we have this white one here, which compared to the other ones, in my opinion, and it's just kind of boring. Also, not to mention his clip piece for his head is black, while the rest of him is obviously white, and it just doesn't look very good. I don't know why LEGO did this. My best guess is that they simply just did not have this piece in white back in 2008, but still, it clearly just throws off the color palette of the figure and makes it look kind of off. Up next, we have 2009, and this was actually a pretty tricky year for me to pick the worst figure from. LEGO released 46 new Star Wars figures this year, and some of you guys might not like my pick, but I think I gotta go with the Clone Wars Mace Windu from Mace Windu's Jedi Starfighter. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people that just straight up power hates on all of the face printing from these old Clone Wars figures. However, Mace Windu has always been one of the ones that actually looks really cursed to me. It's almost like they literally took a screenshot of his head from the show and just used like a PNG and pasted it onto the shape of his head. I mean, he looks like one of those PNG stormtroopers that I posted on my Instagram a few weeks ago, but as an official figure, not as a meme. It's just very uncanny looking to me. The mouth and head placement is weird. The way they really morphed his head to fit the shape of a minifigure head is also weird. I mean, this figure simply is just very uncanny looking, and that's why I had to pick it for this year. Anyways though, moving on to the year 2010, LEGO released 44 new Star Wars figures this year, and all of them are actually really good for the most part, so in this scenario, I just gotta pick one that I think is the least exciting, so I'm going with the Imperial Pilot from the UCS Imperial Shuttle. Like many other picks on this list, it's not a bad figure, it's simply just not interesting compared to all of the other ones that released in its respective year, and that's really all I have to say about it. Moving on to 2011, I'd say one of the more underrated years of LEGO Star Wars. LEGO released a total of 63 new Star Wars figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst one is actually another Droideka, that being the Droideka from 7877 Naboo Starfighter. Now, this Droideka here is in no way as bad as the one from 2007 that I just talked about. However, the reason I picked it is because, again, it's just super oversized. This one is actually bigger than the one from 2007. Now, I mean, they got its shaping and posture down to a T. You gotta give them credit for that. It looks pretty much perfect in that area, but again, it's just way too oversized. This thing is almost as tall as 2 minifigures. Moving on to 2012, LEGO released a total of 72 new Star Wars figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst one is Padme from the Malevolence. Pretty much everything that's wrong with the Mace Windu that I talked about earlier is also wrong with this figure right here. You can tell her face was just pretty dramatically warped to be able to fit on the head shape of a LEGO minifigure. The eyes and mouth are really goofy because they're so big, and I'd even say the eyes are spread out a little too far. I do think that Mace Windu is worse, but this one still feels pretty uncanny. Moving on to 2013, this was definitely the year where Star Wars figures started to become more modern. LEGO released a total of 87 Star Wars figures this year, and the one I picked as the weakest of the bunch is probably going to seem kind of random to you guys. It's the female Jedi Padawan from the exclusive Holocron Chamber set. To some of you guys, this might seem like a bit of a cop-out because this minifigure didn't come in a normal set. It came in a very rare promotional set for the Yoda Chronicles, but I mean, to be honest, I don't really care. When you compare this figure to all of the other figures that released in 2013, it's just pretty boring and doesn't stand out. Moving on to 2014, as many of you guys know, I consider this to be the best year of LEGO Star Wars to date, and a huge reason for that is because of the high quality minifigures, but still I had to pick one that I think is the worst, so I'm going with the Gonk Droid from the UCS Sandcrawler. Now, LEGO has definitely made quite a few bad Gonk Droids over the years, so it's not like this one in particular is the worst of the worst, but I do still think it was the worst figure that released in 2014. I think they were simply just doing too much with the build. They kind of butchered the shape of what a Gonk Droid is supposed to look like. I mean, they're supposed to be basically a walking cube, or I guess a bit more of a rectangular cube, but still, they got this right plenty of times, like the original Gonk Droids and then the newer one from 2023, but with this 2014 one right here, they were just doing too much. There's an exposed stud on the side, which looks weird. There's also that tile piece on the top, which just completely ruins the cube shape. I mean, I don't really know what the thought process was behind the design of this one, but it just doesn't look very good. Moving on to 2015, the year that we saw the introduction of sequel sets, LEGO released a total of 81 figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst two actually are both the male and female Resistance Troopers from the First Order transport. I decided to include both of them here because they're basically just a male and female version of the exact same figure, and they're not necessarily bad, they're just boring. They don't have any leg printing, they got very basic face prints and torso prints, and also the very next year, LEGO released more Resistance Troopers that have these awesome helmets that just put these two to shame, and then when comparing them to the rest of the 2015 figure lineup, I feel like they just don't even compare when it comes to uniqueness. Up next, we have 2016. LEGO released 116 new Star Wars figures this year. To this day, that is the most Star Wars figures they have ever released in a single year, and in my opinion, the worst one, very similar to 2015, is the Resistance officer from the Resistance Trooper Battle Pack. Like the male and female Resistance Troopers I just talked about, this figure is just really boring. He's just an unnamed background officer, no leg printing, very minimal torso and face printing, and then also not to mention, it's a bit ironic that he literally comes in the set that contains those other Resistance Troopers that I just mentioned, the ones that have the cool helmets, you know, and they just make him and the other two from 2015 feel really boring. Anyways though, moving on, up next we have 2017. LEGO released a total of 81 figures this year, and in my opinion, the weakest one, or the worst one actually, is the DD-13 medical assistant droid from Darth Vader's transformation. And the reason is just because this figure is really inaccurate, and I think in 2017, LEGO definitely could have done a better job. Most people probably wouldn't even know this because it's just a random background medical droid, but the droid in Star Wars is actually supposed to have 3 legs. It's kind of like a tripod droid, and that's why the figure has that little back arm piece that hangs down, except the problem is it doesn't even look like a third leg. It looks like he's just wearing a backpack that has a piece hanging down from it. And again, for 2017, mind you, by this point, we're pretty much in the modern era of LEGO Star Wars. I just think this could have been better. Up next, we have 2018. LEGO released a total of 94 new Star Wars figures this year, and for the worst one, I'm going with the Droideka from the Droideka Polybag. Most of you guys have probably never even seen this before, as it's a standalone figure that came in its own polybag from a magazine. And I mean, I have to say, the figure itself is actually not that bad. It's definitely not near as bad as the one from 2007, but again, just relative to the year that it released in, I just think it's the weakest figure, and the main reason is because of the legs. I think the upper half of the body actually looks pretty good, but the legs are where I get thrown off. In my opinion, if they would have just designed the legs a bit differently, this actually would be one of the better Droidekas, but they kind of butchered it. Moving on to 2019, this one was an absolute no-brainer for me. LEGO released 87 new Star Wars figures, and the worst one has got to be the very first iteration of the Family Guy Stormtrooper. It appeared in 5 different sets that year, but the most notable one is the Imperial Dropship 20th Anniversary Edition. This was the set where LEGO introduced the infamous Family Guy Stormtrooper, and they have used it ever since, and it's literally the worst Stormtrooper helmet they've ever made before. It is so dramatically oversized and ugly compared to the 2014 variant, and it's even worse when you look at it from the side angle and you can see how it kind of bends over the torso right there. I mean, from the front, it looks like it got stepped on and squished, and then from the side, it looks like it's like running down the top of the torso. That's literally the best way I can describe it. It looks like it's melting, quite literally. And since 2019 was the year they introduced it in, it just felt fitting to pick it. Moving on to 2020, compared to the late 2010s, this was definitely a smaller year for LEGO Star Wars. They introduced only 59 new figures this year, and for the most part, they're all actually really good. So I just picked the one that I think is the least exciting, that being Ben Kenobi, or old Obi-Wan Kenobi from Obi-Wan's hut. Like many other figures on this list, again, it's not necessarily a bad figure. Actually, it's not a bad figure at all. It's just not very exciting. They could have given him a cape, they could have given him his robes like they did in 2014, or just simply leg printing in general, but they didn't do that, so it just feels a bit bland. Moving on to 2021, like 2020, this was another very small year relative to the time period for LEGO Star Wars. They released only 45 new figures this year, and for the most part, besides the Family Guy Stormtroopers, they're all really good. I'm just not going to pick these guys again because I already picked them for 2019. So with that being said, the least exciting one out of the bunch to me is General Veers from Darth Vader's meditation chamber. Not a bad figure in any way, it just happens to be that Imperial officers are not very exciting. I know General Veers is a very iconic character, but in this case, that's not really saving him. This figure is just nothing to go crazy over. Anyways though, now moving on to 2022, we are now finally entering the actual current era of LEGO Star Wars. LEGO released 63 new Star Wars figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst one was a no-brainer. It's obviously the 212th Trooper from the ATTE. Not only was this the very first clone Slop Trooper, it's also, to this day, arguably the worst Slop Trooper. The helmet print is just absolutely hideous, how the orange stripe doesn't come down to a point. It literally just looks so ugly to me, and then of course the helmet warts don't help it either. And even worse, in the renders and on the box of the ATTE, they make the helmet look how it's supposed to. That orange bit comes down to a point and actually looks fairly good besides the helmet holes. But in person, that's not what it looks like at all. The helmet print is freaking terrible. And the worst case of them falsely advertising what it looks like has got to be on the foil pack from 2023. Not only did they fix the orange stripe, but they also removed the helmet holes on the side of the helmet, so both the shape of the helmet looks good and the actual printing of the helmet looks good. But then right next to that, they have what the figure actually looks like, and it's ridiculous. So yeah, a lot of shenanigans with this figure over the years, and to me at least, it's just a no-brainer to pick this as the worst one from 2022. Moving on to 2023, arguably one of the most controversial years of LEGO Star Wars ever. LEGO released 70 new figures this year, and some of you guys might not like my pick, but I have to go with the Phase Phase 2 Commander Fox from the Coruscant Guard gunship. This might actually be the worst clone trooper LEGO has ever made before, and it's definitely the most disappointing too, because up until this point we had been wanting a Phase 2 Commander Fox for so long, and LEGO finally released it, but it looked terrible. The worst part about it was obviously the pink on the torso, because the red plastic underneath was bleeding through the white printing, and instead of the torso being solid white like it's supposed to be, it obviously has a very noticeable pink tint to it, which just looks bad. And then on top of that, you've also got the printed camo or waist cape, and you guys know how I feel about these. They just look ugly. They just look like two slivers on the side of the legs. They don't even resemble a waist cape at all. And if LEGO isn't going to include physical ones, they shouldn't include them at all, because these two slivers plastered on top of the legs ruin what would be good leg printing without them. So yeah, overall this figure is just a mess. The torso print is terrible, and the leg printing is also terrible because of the printed camo. Moving on to 2024, in my opinion, this year has so far been the best year of the 2020s for Star Wars. LEGO introduced 78 new Star Wars figures this year, and in my opinion, the worst one is easily L3GO, or the LEGO Astromech droid from 75393 TIE Fighter and X-Wing mashup. This is one of those weird and wacky Rebuild the Galaxy figures, and in my opinion, it's the only one that they truly missed with. Because as we all know, Rebuild the Galaxy in 2024 was for the most part really exciting, because they obviously introduced figures like the Jedi Darth Vader, Jedi Bob, Darth Jar Jar, and Darth Rey, and Evil C-3PO, along with some other fun wacky ones like the Akbar Clone Trooper. But then you had the LEGO droid right here, or the McDonald's droid as people were calling it, and it just looks freaking ugly. I mean, I know what they're trying to do by obviously calling it L3GO, which means a LEGO, and then making the colors of it the LEGO colors, but it just looks tacky, and it's arguably the ugliest astromech LEGO has released before. Anyways though, next up, second to last, we have 2025, which was probably the most controversial year of LEGO Star Wars ever, really. There were 87 new Star Wars figures introduced this year, and just like the year being controversial, the figure I'm going with as the worst figure is also probably going to be kind of controversial and might piss some of you guys off, but it's the 327th Trooper from the 327th Battle Pack. I mean, this figure is just everything wrong with a modern clone trooper. You have the ugly shaped helmet because of the double bump of the helmet holes, and then of course you have the ugly printed waist capes that I talked about earlier. Again, if LEGO isn't going to include physical ones, I'd rather them just not be there because they ruin what would be good leg printing. It does have the new pauldron piece, which is really nice, except that's hard to appreciate when it's got two other things about it that are really bad and distracting. I mean, again, most of you guys are probably going to get pissy at me in the comments for picking this one, but I just don't think the figure is very good. And it's also kind of disappointing that this is all we have when it comes to a modern 327th Trooper. Anyways though, now finally making our way to 2026. So far, LEGO has released 44 figures this year, and we technically haven't seen all of them yet because the UCS Super Star Destroyer isn't out yet, and also we don't know what the holiday set this year is going to be, but I still think it's safe for me to already pick one that I think is the worst, and I'm going with the female Mandalorian from the Siege of Mandalore Battle Pack. And the reason is simply because of the helmet print, and no, it's not just because the visor should be black, it's because the fact that it's gray literally makes it look aesthetically unpleasing. And this is the specific reason I picked the female one and not the male one, because on the male one, the gray visor actually looks decent. There's more red and black surrounding it, so there's actually contrast and the visor kind of stands out. But on the female one, there's literally no contrast because it's gray on the inside of the visor and it's gray on the outside of the visor. It's like all the colors are just running together, and it's quite literally an eyesore to look at, in my opinion. And if it was black, this problem just wouldn't be there. So that is why, in my opinion, it is the worst figure from 2026. Anyways though, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Those are what I think are the worst or weakest Star Wars figures from every year of Star Wars, that being from 1999 all the way up to 2026. Let me know what you think about my picks down in the comments below. Do you love them? Do you hate them? If you are new, please consider subscribing. And if you want to check out more of my videos, you can see them on the end screen right now.